thinking does not always have to be about the long term either. It can be more near term. Then there's this, it's on the slide and it's referred to as corporate planning, but this is more kind of like the medium term strategic work, which is always thinking through how do we make sure that the organization continues to be sustainable and is performing and meeting its long-term strategic objectives. So examples of corporate planning work can be, more narrowly focused strategies to optimize services, to grow in specific markets, to increase our faculty recruitment. So you can build strategies in the medium term to achieve certain objectives that hopefully ultimately boil back up to the long-term why of the organization and the key strategic objectives. And then we have long-term planning, and that's what we're going to focus a lot of time on today, is longer-term strategic planning. So these are the 5 general phases of strategic planning. This is like the Cadillac, I don't know if that translates, but this is like the gold-plated, like, premium version of strategic planning. This is if you have a lot of time and resources to dedicate to strategic planning, then you do all of these things in an ideal world. But you don't always have a lot of time, right? When you were asked, you need to develop a strategic plan, did your boss or managers give you like 20% of your time to develop the strategy? Or did they say, develop the strategy on top of your day job? Yeah. Yeah, today for tomorrow, exactly. So you did like a napkin straight, you took a napkin out and you basically, right? Well, this is the whole kit and caboodle, if you have a lot of time. If you don't have a lot of time, then what I would recommend is to take at least 1 or 2 components of each of these 5 different phases and incorporate it into kind of a rapid strategic planning process. So the first phase is framing. And the most important part of framing is to really identify at the outset what is our mission and what is our vision. Now, the interesting thing, and I think the fun thing about strategic planning, is you can start with a mission and a vision. You can go through strategic planning, and at the end of the process, you can realize, oh my God, we got our mission wrong, or we got our vision wrong. It should actually be this. Because things that we learned during the strategic planning process actually taught us that we need to redefine our mission and vision. So oftentimes, if you have an existing strategic plan, you might start with your existing mission and vision. Think about how the world has changed and what you need to do to continue to achieve your mission and vision. But through that process, you might realize we actually had it wrong or we need a new one. So what's a mission and what's a vision? So a vision is, where do we want to go? Where do we want to be 5 years from now? So a fast food restaurant might have a vision of 5 years from now, we want to be the #1 fast food restaurant in Canada. That's the vision. Where do we want to go? And then the mission is, what are we going to do to get there? What we're going to do to get there is, or who do we want to be in order to get there? That fast food restaurant might say, we are going to provide the highest quality food at the fastest possible time with a smile on our face. If we do that, we stay to that mission, we'll achieve our vision of being the #1 fast food restaurant in Canada. So framing takes time. You need to kind of level set on what your day 1 mission and vision is. you need to define the scope of the work. This is really important. So, especially in a 20,000 person organization like CHOMP, we could go big with our strategy, or we could go small, we could go narrow. So every day, there's a million different strategic plans being developed. So you need to really understand, well, what are you solving for? Am I developing a strategic plan for the division, for the department, for the entire network, for the enterprise? And then you may also do a quick kind of diagnostic. Let's say you're doing a division strategic plan, so just for your particular division. You may, via a quick diagnostic or survey, say, you know what, we don't have a lot of time. I was told I had to do it tomorrow. So I'm not going to solve for how our division delivers excellent quality care. I think we do a pretty darn good job, and this is you exercising your own leadership, right? I think we do a good job at clinical care, but I can't get anyone to stay. Everyone keeps leaving. So we're actually going to focus the scope of this strategy on our people. How do we develop a strategy so that our people are fulfilled, happy, and stay? Because the turnover has been really costly. So I figure out the scope of what you're trying to solve for. And we talked about this already in systems thinking. Identify, once you know the scope, identify all the key stakeholders, both within the entity that you're planning for and outside. So I may be the chief of orthopedics, and I'm doing a strategic plan for my division, but man, I can't be successful if I don't have radiology on board. So I need to make sure I have someone from radiology, the right people, involved with me at the very beginning of the strategic planning process. Because if I just go to them at the end and say, here's my strategy, I need your help with that, like, well, I have my own priorities, right? Like, you didn't tell me you were doing a strategic plan. Diagnostics and forecasting. So another way to think about this is developing kind of a current state assessment. What does the world look like today? Why don't we stick with the division analogy for the rest of today? What is my division really good at? What is my division not so good at? What is the biggest strength? This is where you identify your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, your threats. We call it a SWOT assessment, right? This is where you would do it in the diagnosis and forecasting phase. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? What are our current challenges? How do we create value for our customer, in this case, patients? These are the types of questions that you want to be asking yourself. It's developing an effective current state is a little bit of qualitative analysis, right? So you want to collect input from people on your team. Ideally, if you have a lot of time, you collect input from your collaborating partners in other parts of the organization. You collaborate input from your patients. Again, this is why I say strategic planning, it takes a lot of time, right? If you really want to do it right, and your boss says, hey, I want you to do one for your division, you should go back and say, hey, well, give me 10% of my time to do it right. So it takes a lot of time. But even if you have a day, you can use parts of this methodology to think strategically. So like I said, part of the current state, the diagnostic, the forecasting is qualitative assessment. You can quickly do qualitative assessment by just getting a bunch of people from your division into a room and say, let's talk about this stuff. If you have more time, you can bring in quantitative data. You can look at your volumes over the last 5 years. Are my volumes going up or down? Are my patient outcomes getting better? Are they getting worse? Bring in quantitative data where you can, to really complement the qualitative data. And then, like I said earlier, this lecture is called Strategic Planning in Uncertain Times. If you can, start to develop a perspective, because again, if you're doing a strategic plan for the long term, you're thinking about, how do I achieve my mission 5 years from now? Develop a perspective on what you think the world will actually look like 5 years from now. Is it going to be the same? Is it going to change? If it's going to change, what parts of the world might change? And how do we know that? We'll get a little bit more into forecasting a little bit later. And then once you have a really good sense of, okay, I know what I'm solving for, I know what my world looks like today, I have a sense of what I think the world might look like tomorrow, let me just generate as many ideas as I can of different objectives and options and strategies that I can achieve my mission within the context of the current state and future state that I've defined for myself. Once you've generated a sense of options, you're going to have to narrow them down. Right? A good strategy does not have 15 or 20. I mean, it could, but let me take a step back, because it depends on how big your organization is. A good strategy does not have 100 different objectives. That's way too much, right? That's objective overload. So a good strategy should really strike a balance to identify the highest impact objectives that will help the organization achieve its mission. But you're never going to get it perfect right off the bat. So you might generate 100 potential objectives or ideas and have to narrow them down to 10. So a good way to do that is to invite people in, have conversations about the objectives, do more quantitative analysis if possible to see if you can start to forecast what would be the financial impact of various objectives, if financial sustainability is something that you're trying to solve for as part of your scoping. And then eventually, you have to, once you've done some predictive impact modeling, talk to people about which strategies make the most sense, pressure test. One thing we do sometimes is we'll actually bring in an external review board in, people from outside of CHOP, and say, what do you guys think about our strategies? Of course, you have to be careful about that because you don't want your competition to be on the external review board. And so maybe we bring them in just for the research portion or outcomes portion, but maybe when we're talking about growth and market strategy, we have to keep that kind of to ourselves. That's another way to kind of validate and prioritize which options make the most sense. Then you boil them all up to a set of core strategic objectives that we're going to achieve as an organization. And depending on how developed you want it to be, you may just leave it at, we have 5 strategic objectives for the organization. These are the 5 things we all need to be focusing on the next 5 years. This is our roadmap. Or you can go a level lower and say, we have these 5 strategic objectives. These are the things we're going to prioritize and care the most about. These are the things that are going to differentiate us the most, help us achieve our mission. And within each of those objectives, we're going to have 5 tactics, 5 key tactics that we are going to pursue as an organization in order to achieve those objectives. Some of the tactics may or may not be relevant to every function within the organization, and that's where developing an implementation plan becomes really important. To be very clear-eyed that for various objectives and tactics, they may impact or involve effort of some organizations more than others, and who's going to actually be in charge of overseeing the various tactics that make up a strategic plan. So identifying responsible stakeholders is very important and as a key part of developing a successful implementation plan. Part of implementation too is understanding, is the plan working? So as I said earlier, you don't want to develop a plan, wait 5 years, and be like, did it work? Well, if it didn't, you just wasted 5 years. So what are the key metrics tied to the tactics, tied to the overall strategic objectives that we need to be tracking to make sure, to see if it's working? Is it having the desired outcome that we thought it would? And if it's not, you can adjust and pivot your plan on an annual basis. Communication. This is absolutely vital. So, using CHOP as an example again, 20,000 employees. If you don't tell the organization why this is our strategy, why it's important, you're not going to get buy-in from people. And so figuring out and being very, very purposeful on a communication process, a communication plan, is key for successful implementation. And that can take the form of so many different forms. Effective communication, from my perspective, is not just developing a set of email announcements and say, hey, here's our plan, here's why. That's part of it. But it's also going out and taking the time to talk with people and to say, hey, what do you hate about this plan? Like, get people to tell you why they don't like it. Get them, at least give them the opportunity to air their concerns. And you can hear their input, and hopefully you can provide a reply that says, oh, we've thought about this, and this is important, and here's why we're thinking about it this way. Or you can get them to think about the plan in a different way that they hadn't quite put together. Another key part of communication is get what we call champions to advocate for your plan. So, I mentioned earlier that CHOP is made up of the hospital and then the physician practices. There's oftentimes this tension between the hospital and physician practices where the hospital wants to grow. We want to grow, we want to see more, we want to grow, we want to go to new geographies, we want to see more patients, we want to do more things. Well, more times than not, that comes on the backs of our specialists. So our specialists are saying, you want us to do more? You want me to drive an hour to New Jersey now to see patients, right? So having clinical champions involved in the process can do a lot of things. One, they can voice that perspective to the strategic planners that may be employed by the hospital to say, hey, you can't do this. You're going to have a mutiny on your hands, right? Like, this is not realistic. Also, by having those champions involved in the process, they can go back to their divisions, their departments, and say, we had 10 people from the department or division involved in the work. This is what we contributed to the process. This is what we communicated, and because of our involvement, we were able to get XYZ more dollars to get more specialists. And we got commitment that if we're going to open up this site an hour away in New Jersey, that for small divisions, they're only going to have to be there once a month, right? So by having champions involved at the beginning, they can help go back to their departments to say, you were heard, you were thought of, and this is what your division is going to get. This is the support you're going to get to make sure that we can execute on the broader strategy in a sustainable and balanced way. And communication never stops, right? Everyone in the organization is so busy that you can tell them this is the strategy, and then 3 months later, you're like, what? I saw this one-page slide that was pretty and it said what we're going to do, but I saw it for 10 minutes. I went back to my real world. What strategy? So figuring out a way to really reinforce it every day is really important. Of course, every day is being a little hyperbolic because you can't reinforce anything every day, but as much as possible, it's a good thing.